Okay, so in this video I'm going to start looking at Jenn's flatmate, Nathalie. Now, as you know, Nathalie just happens to be best friends with Jenn's sister Stephanie, and they've been best friends since middle school. We know that Stephanie is 4 years younger than Jenn, and I think that is also significant and something to keep in mind when we're listening to this video. Because, as people pointed out when we were listening to Angelica's first interview, at the end of the day, Jenn is their landlord. So there's got to be some hesitation in terms of not wanting to say too much that might make Jenn look bad, not want to show her in a bad light. And you also have the best friend element, which I'll come back to in a minute. But the fact that she is younger than Jenn, and she's known Jenn, no doubt, as long as she's known Stephanie, unless, of course, Jenn's whole family are the kind of family that don't have friends over. But essentially, she's her best friend's older sister, which definitely puts her in a bit of a position of power over Nathalie, even as an adult. So I found myself thinking about my relationship with my best friend from childhood and her family, and especially her older siblings. Now, obviously, I've never shared a house with her older siblings. Sure, I had lots of sleepovers at my best friend's house when we were growing up, but, you know, it's not like I was ever flatmates with her siblings or anything like that. That said, her older sister, who I think is probably maybe almost 2 years older than her, certainly I could see myself deferring to her in terms of who had the most authority in that one-on-one relationship, just because I did grow up with her as the older sister. And, you know, when you're a teenager, older sisters just are boss. So, in a situation like this, how loyal would I be to my best friend's siblings? Well, to be honest, I think I probably would be careful about how I answered questions, regardless of what I thought of those particular siblings, because of my loyalty to my best friend. I certainly wouldn't be wanting to cause any pain for her family if I could avoid it. However, at the same time, if it came to any of her siblings and they had a partner who I didn't approve of, someone who sent up red flags for me, you bet I would be giving out every little bit of information I could, particularly if there were children involved. So, to me, I would expect the loyalty to go so far. Sure, she may want to protect Jenn, but if in this interview, if she is avoiding things to protect Stefan for Jenn's sake, then to me, that's just going too far. Now, it's a while since I've looked at this interview, so I can't remember if my impression of her protecting Jenn goes as far as her avoiding answering things about Stefan or pleading ignorance, so I guess I'll have to figure that out as we go along. So on that note, let's just jump into this interview with Nathalie.
Once again, thank you so much for. I don't know if I have the wrong phone number for you. I tried calling, left a message, but I don't know if I have the same number. But regardless, we're here. So once again, I'm Detective Morris. I'm the one that's the lead investigator in this case, and this is Reyes Soto. Didn't know if you spoke English or Spanish, so that's the reason I brought him, because he speaks Spanish. Are you comfortable speaking English to me? It sounds English. Like you. Okay, perfect. Yeah. All right, so just for the record, I'm saying it is March 7, 2024. The time is 10:38 a.m. This is a reference to case number 24001896, and we are at, what's this address? Morris, Detective Reyes Soto, and spell your first name for me.
Nathalie.
And your last name?
Rosero.
And your birthday?
June 10th, 1990.
And what is your phone number?
Calls. Because of my work, unfortunately, sometimes my personal number gets used. So I get a lot of robocalls.
Right.
So I do apologize.
No worries.
I can save your number and like that.
Yeah, when I leave here, I'll give you my cell phone number. Mm-hmm. So then if we have to communicate, then you have that number saved and I'll pop up.
For sure.
So before we start, if I could just get you to raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the statement you're about to give is the truth, nothing but the truth, to the best of your knowledge, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay. So you're kind of aware of what's going on with Jennifer Soto and her daughter Maddie, and what happened with Madeline. I'm assuming you know.
I can tell you because I've been super blinders.
Mm-hmm.
I know that something happened to Madeline, more than likely in the property, and that obviously because a child's involved, naturally DCF, and there has, for the sake of Maddie, there has to be a deep investigation. Mm-hmm. That's as far as I know.
Okay.
So, because I don't talk to anybody about this, I've been really at home. My boss gave me the time off, so I've been just healing here.
Perfect. Keep doing that. This is a lot. And being that you were kind of close to the situation, it makes it that much worse for you, So if you have family support and stuff like that, that is the best thing for you, And if your boss is giving you time off, then it makes it even better. Yeah. Look, you're still getting paid, but it is what it is.
Okay, here's the thing. I can understand that in a situation like that you are not going to broach the subject with family members or those that were close to the child unless they actually come to you and discuss it with you first. But hearing her say that she's only got this minimal understanding of what's happened and she's pretty much had blinkers, I find that surprising, because for me, part of trying to come to terms with it would be wanting to find out as much as I could. So listening to the media stories, reading articles online, just trying to wrap my head around it. But like I said, everyone experiences these things differently, so it's really not my place to judge how she coped with the situation.
So, all right, I'm just going to start kind of from the beginning. How did you and Jennifer become to know each other?
So I first met Stephanie Soto. She's my best friend.
Okay. Stephanie is Jennifer's sister, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Okay.
And I'm pretty sure we met in middle school, but we got really close in high school.
Okay.
And then getting close, like you make family. I met her mom, and her stepdad, and like her little sister. Then met Jenn. At some point, once we graduated, all three of us moved in together. And I think we lived together for maybe 9 months, 10 months, like between, I was like 18 and 19. And then Jenn got pregnant with Maddie, and then she moved out. And then we all took our separate lives, but we stayed close. And because we ended up having children the same age, we kept the kids together.
So this would be where the confusion came from in the interview with Jenn when, was it the attorney asked her? He thought that Stephanie had at one point in time lived in the townhouse with Jenn and with Nathalie. But wherever it was that they lived together for that 6 months wouldn't have been the townhouse, because Juan didn't buy that until shortly after Maddie was born. He bought that in 2012. So this was before he bought the townhouse. But it's interesting just having this perspective that the three of them did live together for 6 months, and then Jenn got pregnant with Maddie and moved out. I'm willing to bet that she probably moved in with Yolanda. It seems to be her pattern, doesn't it? Now, one question that has been discussed under multiple videos of mine is the question of how come Nathalie wasn't invited to Maddie's birthday party? And when you hear her talking here about them basically, staying close and their kids having that connection between them, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Because the fact that the kids did have that relationship between them would make me think there would be all the more reason for them to have been invited to Maddie's birthday.
So Maddie was one of my son's first friends.
Okay.
So, because my son is 12, Maddie's just turned 13.
So there it is. Her son was 12 when all this happened. And yeah, here she's saying Maddie was one of his first friends. Meaning that him and Maddie knew each other from when they were like little itty bitty kids. And yet him and Nathalie weren't invited to her birthday. I find the dynamics of that family to be really confusing.
So that's kind of, in that process of raising kids together, like you kind of form like a sisterhood. And with Jenn, I always felt a little bit close because we shared just, I guess, similar struggles, like with anxiety. And like, I feel like she was able to share with me, like I was able to share with her, like just anxieties of motherhood sometimes,
She's easy to talk to.
Yeah, and I felt like naturally, me as a person, I'm very much like, I want my peoples to do good. Like, I don't want anybody around me to fail, because that's a reflection of who you are. So even throughout this entire time, I've been hopeful, like just trying to like help the family as much as I can.
Okay, so there's already quite a bit to unpack here. So based on what she's saying here, I'm going to speculate that the decision over who was going to go to Maddie's birthday in terms of adults was Yolanda's decision. And that perhaps Jenn and Stephanie didn't really necessarily have a say in the matter. Yolanda probably said to Maddie, invite your friends from school, but as for the family side of things, that was basically Yolanda calling the shots. And I suspect that's why Nathalie wasn't invited. I suspect that had it been Stephanie's chance to give input, had it been her decision, then Nathalie and her son would have been invited. Because she talks about them as being a bit of a sisterhood, which, you know, does imply a certain intimate closeness. I think too what she's saying here about her relationship with Jenn really does explain a lot. Now, we've seen the real Jenn. In my opinion, Jenn is a sociopath and a narcissist. Jenn really couldn't give two hoots about anybody other than herself. But the other thing that we've seen with Jenn, and I think this comes into play here, is that she can be a chameleon. If you look back through the interviews, she was playing the role that she believed she was expected to play. She changed the way she spoke depending on what the situation was with the detectives. She even changed the way she acted after she was called out on essentially not reacting the right way about her daughter being missing. So when I hear Stephanie saying that they essentially bonded over shared experiences like anxiety, now I'm certainly not going to turn around and say, oh, Jenn didn't suffer from anxiety, because, you know, we can't judge a person's hidden disabilities. But I am going to say, knowing what a chameleon Jenn was, I can imagine her using that as a way to manipulate her relationship with Nathalie. It made her feel important to be able to claim, I have anxiety too. And like I said, she may have had anxiety, but you can bet that she would have talked it up with Nathalie, because essentially she would have wanted to have attention from it too. She wouldn't want to have just given Nathalie sympathy and support over that without getting something back out of it herself. It's that typical narcissist thing of wanting to always be the centre of attention, wanting to always be at the top of the pile in terms of if you were sitting there with a narcissist like Jenn and said that you felt like you were getting a bit of a headache, her response would probably be, yeah, I know, I've had this shocking headache for the last 5 days. She's going to one-up you, and hers is going to be so much worse than yours, because that way she doesn't have to give you her sympathy and the attention is drawn back on her. So in terms of the anxiety thing, yes, she may have suffered anxiety, but you can bet it was a way of manipulating Nathalie. If Nathalie raised the issue of anxiety, I can bet that Jenn, her anxiety was probably 1,000 times worse than Nathalie's. So sure, they bonded over it, but in a way that was gratifying for Jenn. She may have offered false sympathy, but only to garner sympathy for herself. Now, Nathalie said something really, really crucial here. I don't want anyone around me to fail because it's a reflection on who you are. What does she mean by that? Basically, if someone around you fails, clearly you've not done enough to help them out. You've not been supportive enough. You've not given enough of yourself to prevent them from failing. That's something that's really important to keep in mind while we're listening to this interview, because basically what she's saying here is that in terms of Jenn, in terms of Maddie, any failures there, any failures by Jenn, any inadequacies in the way Maddie was being looked after, the way Nathalie sees it is that it's also a reflection on her. And that could explain a lot in terms of why she really did seem to protect Jenn in this interview. She didn't want Jenn to fail, for starters, because it would be a reflection on her, but also going back to what was going on with Maddie. If she was to mention things that had been wrong, to her that's a reflection on her as well. So it's that sense of she doesn't want to admit to her own failures here. And that's what it would be if she was to be brutally honest when it comes to Jenn.
That's just the personality that I am. So I kind of gravitated to her because I felt like she needed that too, you know?
She gravitated to Jenn because she felt Jenn had that need, the need for support. Jenn would have lapped that up and she would have played it up. So Jenn would have done everything in her power to maintain this relationship with Nathalie simply because it was feeding her narcissistic needs. Having someone who would freely give her sympathy, someone who would basically forgive her flaws and consider them as something that just meant she needed more understanding and more support. This is a dream relationship for a narcissist. So she would have treated Nathalie like she was someone super important, someone who meant so much to her. You know, someone who was such a close friend because they were on the same level. But you can bet that as soon as she wasn't getting that whole narcissistic feed from Nathalie anymore, she would have dropped her like a hot potato. So you have someone here who is the sort of person who naturally shows a lot of empathy towards other people, and that made her the perfect person to make as a friend for Jenn. Because for narcissists like that, you give them empathy, they'll lap it up and they come back for more.
So at some point, I needed a place to stay. I was, having lived on your own and then having to come back home, you crave wanting to have your own space at some point. And Jenn had the room available, and I still happened to be a master, so I don't have to share a bathroom with anybody. And that's how we get to the point where I'm there. But our friendship spans from like since I first met her.
Gotcha.
We just kind of like developed that because I was best friends with her sister. We never, we till this day, like she was her sister.
So you can imagine the delight that Jenn must have felt to have her own live-in source of narcissistic supply. Because that's what Nathalie was to her. This is someone who was willing to show empathy when needed, willing to, sounds like, listen when Jenn was having a bad day or was struggling with her issues. And this was someone who Jenn could basically have her reliant on her because it was Jenn's home. So that basically put Jenn in a position of power over someone who she knew could give her this ongoing source of narcissistic supply. You know, this is one of those things that a lot of people don't understand with narcissists. They will turn around and say, but, you know, look how generous they were. You know, she gave her sister's best friend somewhere to live. Yes, she did because there was something in it for her. You will see narcissists who may appear to be the most generous people you've seen. But the truth is that will only occur if there is something in it for them. I can bet you that Jenn Soto is definitely not the sort of person who would walk past a homeless person as she walks into a supermarket and then go out of her way to buy something, like some bread rolls or something, for that homeless person and give them to them on the way back out. There's nothing in that for her. Maybe a thank you from the homeless person, but that's not going to feed her need for narcissistic supply. If she were to do something like that, it would be something where she did that and then she would tell everybody she knew about it for the next week so that they could tell her what a good person she was. And I'm willing to bet that's what was happening here with Nathalie. Now, just a quick observation. So Nathalie mentioned here that one of the things that appealed to her with the townhouse was that she basically got a master bedroom with her own bathroom. So just the clarification there. The townhouse had 2 master bedrooms. One was upstairs, one was downstairs. Both of those bedrooms had their own separate bathrooms. And then rooms 3 and 4 were essentially meant to share the other upstairs bathroom.
When did you move into the place in Venetian Bay?
2000, I feel like I almost made it 2 years. In January, it would have been 2 years.
Okay, so 2022-ish? Okay. When you moved in, who all was living in the house?
Jenn, Maddie, there was and I never call her name. I'm very much like in my own world always, but she was like an older lady, maybe like 30, I'm sorry. I forget how old I am sometimes, sorry. But she was like maybe 39, by 2 years ago I was moved in, I was 2 years, so I was 32. So she kind of seemed older to me, but she was always to herself, hardworking. And then Angelica, which she lived right next to me, and then myself. So we have 4 females essentially.
Okay.
Live together.
Okay, why did everyone keep to themselves so much in this townhouse? Is it just the way share houses work in America? Because to me, I can't imagine moving into a house with people and not wanting to get to know them. So, based on what she's saying here, it sounds like her and Angelica pretty much moved in round about the same time. And I'm going to speculate that this older lady that was there for a while probably moved in shortly before Nathalie also. Because what it sounds like to me is that basically these 3 all moved in around the time that Juan basically headed off on his trip. So my understanding has always been this. That is that it was Juan's townhouse, Maddie and Jenn moved in, moved out from, between 2012 up until when Maddie was gone. Obviously, you have Stephen moving in with his daughter, at which stage you had Stephen and Jenn living upstairs, the 2 girls each having a room, one living downstairs. And to me, I just get the sense that, based on what Jenn has said also about Juan basically moving out and wanting her to take over looking after the place, to me, I always got the sense that that was when the flatmates were brought in. And yes, I know there is supposedly a person out there claiming to have lived with Jenn in that townhouse in 2018, but from listening to the interviews and from looking at the questions and answers that she did, to be quite frank, I call BS on that. There's so many inconsistencies in what she says, and the rest of what she says is basically public knowledge anyway. And yes, I did shy away from doing a analysis of the interview with that individual for various reasons. But I am willing, after we finish looking at Nathalie and Angelica, to do a breakdown of the interview or interviews with that individual. Honestly, I think I'd only need to do a breakdown of one interview. If that is something that people are interested in.
At any point between 2022 and now, did anybody move out and move in?
The older lady,
Okay.
she moved out
Do you know
within,
roughly when?
I want to say like 6 months after, like between 6 or 7 months after.
After you moved in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So summertime of 2022-ish.
Yes, I mean, because we didn't live with her for too long after I moved in.
Okay.
And I'm thinking the span of 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it had to have been within the 6 months that she left.
Okay.
So Jenn claims that Maddie couldn't have the upstairs bedroom because Juan wanted the rent money. That room was empty for 12 months then, based on what Nathalie is saying here. That says 2 things to me. 1, there was clearly no urgency in terms of bringing in a new tenant, which says that there was no urgency with regards to bringing in any additional rent money. Also, the room was empty. There was 12 months with an empty room, and you're telling me that Maddie couldn't have had that room. There was no urgency with filling that room. If it was a concern, it would have been filled within the first couple of months. I mean, let's be realistic. I'm presuming that Florida is the same as everywhere else in the world, and that just like everywhere else in the world, following all those lockdowns for the big C word, which apparently YouTube doesn't like, there has been a housing crisis worldwide. Meaning that if they'd really wanted to fill that room, they would have been able to fill it within a few weeks. You can't possibly tell me that it would be possible to have an empty room in a Florida apartment and not have dozens of people applying to get that room. So Jenn's comments about, oh, she couldn't have the room because he wanted the rent, I call BS on that 100%. Now, I know that there is a floor plan somewhere for that townhouse, but I can't remember where I saw it. I certainly don't have a copy. But I'm thinking from memory that room 4 is directly above Maddie's fake room, which to me says that if you happen to be in room 4, given that there was no carpeting in that apartment, given how condensed it all was, I'd imagine that if you were in room 4, you could probably hear anything that was going on directly below you. If room 4 was directly above Maddie's fake room, is the reason it was kept empty because they didn't want people hearing noises from Maddie's fake room? Or was room 4 kept empty for casual use by Stearns, and it only became officially his after him and Jenn officially broke up? Because at the end of the day, there is no reason for that room to have remained empty for a full 12 months.
So she moves out. Does anybody move into her room?
No, I think that they wanted to keep it open to possibly rent it out.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I wanted to rent it out for my son, it just wasn't something that I could do at the moment.
Gotcha. Now, I know because I've been inside the house or condo, townhome, whatever you want to call it, and I see bedrooms are numbered. So downstairs is the master bedroom. Then upstairs is 2, 3, and 4. Mm-hmm. So what number were you staying in?
2.
Okay.
Corner right, corner left with the master bathroom.
And recently, so within the last few months, Angelica was still staying there. Mm-hmm. Do you know what room she was staying in?
Next to me, so I think she was number 3.
Okay.
Pretty sure. She was from when you come in, she was my right.
Okay, and was anybody staying in number 4?
So, once this lady moved out, they had it open for a good amount of time. And then, so within, okay. within, I want to say the time that this lady moved out, at some point, Stefan moves in. And the reason why, so like Stefan, for like the last 5 to 7 years, I want to say, has been like, he was part of the furniture type shit. Like he was in the surroundings. So like, seeing him move in wasn't something that like, because at that point I had known about him and seen him, like it didn't seem like a big deal. I mind my business, right? Like I do my due diligence for me and my son. I can only ask that for like, the people around me. So in that situation, because he never came at me at all with anything, I stayed in my business, I stayed in my little corner, he stayed downstairs, and then at some point they break up or they have some type of issue, he needs his space or whatever the fuck, he moves upstairs.
Okay.
So, and I want to say he lived upstairs for like maybe 3 or 4 months, and then at some point he leaves. Once he leaves, I don't know what happens once he leaves.
Okay, that was some serious word salad going on there. Now, let's start with what the intended message was. The intended message was basically Stefan moved in sometime after June or July of 22, but he'd been hanging around anyway. He was pretty much furniture, so she didn't really pay much attention. At some point in time, he moved upstairs to room 4, but she still didn't really pay much attention to him, and he lived there for probably 4 or 5 months, but she didn't pay much attention to him. And then he moved out, and she doesn't really know anything after that. It's the classic message of, I saw nothing, I heard nothing, I know nothing. And to be perfectly frank, I think that at the time when these interviews came out, there was so many other FOIA things being released that the creators who did actually go through these interviews were probably a little bit distracted and keen to move on to the rest of the FOIA stuff that had been released, and maybe didn't pay as much attention to this as they should. Back when all this stuff was being released, I was seeing the big channels like Grizzly, Plunder, Gavin Fish, The Docket, all of them covering these interviews, and my thoughts at the time were, I'm only an itty bitty channel, no one wants to hear my opinion, so I'm not going to break down these interviews. So I just kind of stayed in my lane and kept doing my other videos on Maddie, breaking down irregularities in statements and stuff like that. So I hadn't really dug into this until now. I just listened to the narrative that was out there, which was essentially the flatmates didn't see anything, didn't know anything. And I was aware that there were a lot of people commenting in videos that something was off, that they felt that the flatmates were covering for Jenn. But I didn't dig because, like I said, at the time I thought, well, I'm a small channel and no one really wants to know what I think anyway. But now I'm going to share my opinions. There is so much going on here in what has just been said. She talks about this older lady moving out sometime around June or July of 2022. And she's saying that basically sometime around then and she's a little bit vague. She's struggling when she's explaining all this to finish her sentences. And it could simply be that the timeline is vague. That's 2 years ago. So I don't blame her. If I had to think about a sequence of events from 2 years ago, I might struggle too. So she's basically said this lady moved out and the room stayed open for quite an amount of time. And then she's trying to get around to explaining the whole how Stefan ended up upstairs. But she's being so vague about it that at first it sounds like she's actually saying that Stefan was using that upstairs room at some point in time, like directly after this woman had moved out. I'm not sure if that's what she was intending to say. She was just all over the place. So she says the room was open for a good amount of time, and then within, I want to say the time that this lady moved out, at some point Stefan moved in. Why is this so difficult to say? Is it, like I said, just because of the time difference? And it's like, well, it's been a while now, and she's just trying to figure out, line up events in her head, think, was Stefan here when this lady was here? No, he moved in after she moved out, that sort of thing. Or is she just being a little bit evasive here? And then she says, and the reason why, pauses, doesn't finish that sentence. Seeing him move in didn't seem like a big deal. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, we're getting somewhere now. And then she segues into, I mind my own business, I do my due diligence for me and my son. Okay. So she's missed parts of the story here. She's saying that him moving in didn't seem like a big deal because he was part of the furniture. She's vague about when he moved in. And note, she's very careful here to not mention that he didn't move into room 4. She's carefully avoiding that. She's avoiding saying he moved in and started sharing a bed downstairs with Jenn and Maddie. Now, later in the interview, she claims that she thinks Maddie slept in her little room. I have questions about that because I think if you live in such a small place, you're going to know where everyone's sleeping. And the fact that she's being so evasive about just directly saying that he moved in downstairs, and she's being really hedgy with the way she's saying it, she's not finishing sentences, and then she talks about she minds her own business and does her due diligence. There's definitely something she's not saying here. I suspect she knew that he was in the same room as Jenn and Maddie. Otherwise, why would you say, I mind my own business, I do my due diligence for me and my son? I mean, it is not something that is unheard of for a single parent to meet someone new and for that person to move in and become a part of their life. You generally don't hear the people around them saying that they're minding their own business about that, because it's something that's so commonplace. we're not living in the 60s where you're not going to move in with someone until you're married. So there's definitely more to the story here. Especially saying, I do my due diligence for me and my son. Is she saying that if she found Mr. Right, the man that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with, that because she has a teenage son, she would choose not to live with the guy? I really don't think that's what she means. I think she is saying that there was something in relation to Stefan moving in that she did not approve of, hence the reason to mind her own business. Why would you give a rat's ass about someone moving in, especially if they're part of the furniture already? As she's said, on one hand, essentially that it was no big deal, but then she turns around and says, I mind my own business. So it must have been a big deal to some extent. There was something about Stefan moving in that she did not approve of. And she even doubles down on that. Because he never came at me at all with anything. And I didn't... Doesn't finish the sentence again. I stayed in my business. I stayed in my little corner. And he stayed downstairs. What does this essentially mean? He didn't come at me. So I minded my own business. Meaning, there were things that Stefan was doing that she didn't like. That she didn't approve of. But because she wasn't brought into the situation, she stayed in her little corner. She decided to mind her own business. And he stayed downstairs. This is more than just talking about someone moving in. Someone who, up until that point, had apparently just been part of the furniture. So you claim that it was no big deal that he moved in. But what she's saying here makes it sound that it was a big deal, that there was something significant going on. And not just something significant going on, but something that went against her own values. And then, in case there was any doubt in your head with regards to her opinion of Stefan, she says they had their issues, he needs his space, or whatever the F, and he moves upstairs. That's loaded. That's essentially saying, I really don't give a rat's ass about why he moved upstairs, because I don't really care about him at all. Whatever the F. So she really didn't like Stefan at all. And she doubles down with that when she says, well, once he leaves, I don't know what happens once he leaves. Meaning, I didn't really care. I didn't make it my business. I didn't speak to Jenn about him after he left. If it was someone that you actually liked or approved of, then you would probably show some interest in why it was that they left. But essentially she's saying, I really couldn't care less why he left. She didn't like him. But not only that, she didn't approve of him. She chose to mind her own business, stay in her little corner. And all this came from the very simple question about room 4. You have this enormous amount of word salad simply to say that, yes, Stefan eventually moved up to room 4. He was there for 2 or 4 months and then he moved out. No mention of room 4 was empty for a year or anything. This whole statement is more about Stefan than about room 4. And without meaning to, she's basically demonstrated that she did not approve of him one little bit. That there were things that were going on that she wouldn't allow around her child. Things that she did not consider to be appropriate. That's a heck of a lot to say as an explanation for basically why a room was or wasn't empty.
Then you start seeing him come back around just to like visit. And again, I mind my business. I'm in and out. I see him like, yo, what's up? Jen, you good? We keep it moving. Like, that was just like the everyday life, right? Like that was it. So once he starts, at some point, I guess, at some point I didn't even know he was here. Like I had no idea, but that room ends up being used for him to be able to be there and help her if like she needed help with the dogs or something like that. Again, what I'm saying now is what pretty much, because I didn't understand why he was here. Like I didn't know he was here. So by the time I'm being told that Maddie is gone, I'm like, well, what do you mean? Who dropped her off at school? Stefan. Okay, well, what the fuck is Stefan here? Oh yeah, he stayed there overnight. I was like, what the fuck?
Okay, I swear my brain nearly exploded listening to that section. Honestly, she makes Jenn look like an amateur. Just to give you some idea of the difficulty of trying to process what was going on here. In the time that I've been working on this one particular section, in between listening to it, taking notes, trying to figure out what the heck is going on, I've done a Uber grocery order because the dogs were running out of biscuits. That's been delivered already. I've listened to it a few times. I've added a layer of translucent clay on a tea light holder that I'm working on. And now I've come back to it. And I'm still reeling. And yes, those are typical ADHD things. When these things become just so enormous, my brain just goes, let's find something else to do, even though we've got to get this work done. Okay, buckle up and let's try and get through this. And please, if I miss anything here, please leave a comment and add your own observations, because, like I said, she makes Jenn look like an amateur. Now, I have to say, I think today's drinking game would have to be, I mind my own business. Although, I probably shouldn't advise that. Last time I suggested a drinking game, I could have ended up putting a lot of people in hospital. Okay, so let's go to the beginning of what she said here. So after talking about him leaving, she says, I start seeing him come back around just to visit. So we had different versions of how often he kept coming back, and I think Jenn claimed at one point that he only came back once. But from what she's saying here, from what Nathalie is saying, he's come back quite frequently. You don't start seeing someone come back around just to visit if that's only happened once. You start seeing these things if it has become a regular occurrence. And she throws in, I mind my own business. It's basically, sees him, greets him, keeps moving. This is the theme in terms of everything relating to Stefan when we hear Nathalie talking about this situation. She sees him, she keeps moving, she minds her own business. Now, this is when it just goes insane. This is when we get the most amazing jumble of unfinished sentences. So once he starts, at the same point, I guess, at some point I didn't even know I had no idea. Now, when she said that she had no idea, the tone of her voice changes. And if you weren't really listening to everything that was being said, you'd think, and I actually made the note in my notebook, tone genuine. Meaning that the way she said that she had no idea sounded like she was being genuine. Sounded like someone being like, I had no idea, you know. But everything around it seems to contradict her. Like I said, she can't finish a sentence here. And I know I don't really need to say this for many of you, but classic sign of deception. Of course, it could also be a sign of confusion, maybe still trying to make sense of the situation. Except that this is the 7th of March. This is almost a week after Maddie was found. She's had time to process. It shouldn't be such a struggle to actually explain what's going on, because she's had all this time to process, and yet she can't string a single sentence together. Once he starts, at some point and then back to the objection, I didn't even know, like I had no idea. And then she goes on to, well, that room ends up being used for him to be there and help her, like if she needed help with the dogs or something like that. Well, that sounds oddly familiar. Although she forgot to add the bit about needing help with Maddie as well. And just like Jenn and Stefan, when they're reciting their narratives, suddenly she can actually say it quite clearly, quite fluently, no delays, gets the entire sentence out in one go. We still don't know what she was trying to say before that. Well, I guess she was somehow trying to say, I didn't even know he had been coming back, or I didn't even know that he'd been there that night. Who knows what she was trying to spit out at that point in time. And then she gets a little bit lost in the word jungle again. Again, what I'm saying now, it's what pretty much, oh my gosh, pick a lane and stick to it. One sentence. Stop, think about what you're trying to say, and say it. Instead of bumbling around with all these partial sentences that don't even seem to connect, other than to showing complete confusion. And then after that we get pretty much, I didn't understand why he was here. I didn't know he was here. Sorry, you didn't know he was here. But even though you didn't know he was here, you didn't understand why he was here? How can you be in a position of not understanding why a person is in a location if you didn't even know that person was in the location? She's trying things on for size. I really think, now that I'm listening to it, that all those people that have said that the flatmates were covering for Jenn, well, I'm having major issues right now with Nathalie. And it does sound like she was covering for Jenn. It shouldn't be such a struggle to be able to say, at some point in time he moved upstairs into room 4. Then, at some point, he moved out, and he came back a few times after he moved out. And then for some reason he came and stayed the night on the evening before Maddie went missing. I didn't even know that was happening. How hard is it to say that? Instead, we just get completely lost trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. Barely any full sentences are coming out of her mouth. And then she says, so by the time I'm being told that Maddie is gone, that's a really, really interesting choice of word. By the time I'm told that Maddie is gone. Not by the time I'm being told Maddie is missing. Or Maddie never made it to school, which was Jenn's favourite. But Maddie was gone. What does that bring to mind with you? Because to me, the first thing that comes to mind is a situation where someone is deceased and it's too early on in the piece for people to actually say that out loud. It's one of those self-protection things that the brain does. It's really hard to turn around and say, that someone really close to you is the unalive. God, I hate that YouTube makes you say crap like that. But the point here is it's something that people struggle to say. Because once you've said it, it becomes real. So, in that initial shock, that moment of loss, the moment when you're still trying to come to terms with it, people will so often say, they're gone. Sorry, he's gone. If we're talking about a child being missing, not so much. We don't say that because a child didn't come home from school, they're gone. We say they're missing. Or we say they didn't come home from school. We don't say they're gone. Gone implies that they are not coming back. If your child is missing, you bet you're going to hope they're coming back. Now, before I tackle the next bit that she says, I just want to draw your attention to a brief audio clip that was kind of stashed away in amongst a bunch of FOIA stuff. This is the tail end of a brief discussion with Nathalie outside of the townhouse. It wasn't labelled in any way that indicated that that's what it was. So I think that's the reason why many people missed it. And I will, when I finish going through this particular interview, go through that entire section separately. But for now, I just want to add in what she said at the end of the discussion, after the discussion was essentially done.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. If there's anything else important you think could help me find her.
So it's just weird, like he typically doesn't drop her off. It's just like a whole bunch of coincidences. So I don't know.
Okay.
It's just weird. But I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
So basically the discussion was over, and it was just the same as sort of what we've heard in this interview. Like I said, I will play it later. But then it's wrapped up and he says, if there's anything else. And she comes out with essentially that it's really weird. He doesn't typically drop her off. And she mentions coincidences. And she's really struggling with this. It's like there's a part of her that's saying, you shouldn't actually be mentioning this. It's like she's wrestling with herself between needing to give information to help find Maddie and not wanting to dob her friend in. So she's really struggling to say this. But the point she's making is that he doesn't typically drop Maddie off at school. It's not normal. It's weird. There are too many coincidences. So with that in mind, let's go back to this conversation that she's relaying with Jenn after Jenn has apparently told her Maddie is gone. And here she says, I'm like, what do you mean? Who dropped her off at school? Well, that's a little bit odd. That's a very odd question to ask, given this. According to her narrative, she didn't know Stefan was there. Meaning that there is only one option for Maddie being dropped off at school. That one option is Jenn. Because she didn't know that Stefan was there. So the question shouldn't even come up, who dropped her off at school. And then apparently the answer is Stefan, and she's like, okay, what the F is Stefan here? Now, we know that there was an officer that attended the townhouse at around, I think, 8 o'clock on the Monday night after Maddie was reported missing. And we know that Nathalie was there at the time, and there was a mention of the things being piled up on Maddie's bed, and that she thought it looked like a person. Now, I don't know if I'm getting a few things mixed up in my head here, and this is part of what we hear later from Nathalie. And I'm thinking that based on what she's saying here, that Jenn must have phoned her and said, Maddie's gone. Because obviously Jenn and Stefan both arrived back at the same time after reporting Maddie missing, so it's not like she'd be going, well, what the F is Stefan doing here? So this would have had to have been a phone conversation. And she says at the end of this, oh yeah, Jenn says to her, oh yeah, he stayed overnight. And she's like, I'm like, what the F? Well, this is a bit of a turnaround. Given that just before this, she'd basically said, you know, at some point in time he started coming back up for visits, and I was just like, whatever, you know, hey dude, you know, that kind of thing. She's making it sound like that was just like, well, you know, accepting it, it's par for the course. And yet now she's talking about Maddie being gone, and instead of it just being like when Stefan was there just for visits, all of a sudden it's like, what the F is he doing here? So how does it go from you just being, oh, whatever, he's come up for a visit, to suddenly, what the F is he doing here? It's like Deb Stearns with her, I don't know what he would have done if he had got in the house. Well, he lived with you, Deb. So why were you suddenly concerned about him getting in the house? So same sort of thing. They're suddenly changing their narrative because of Maddie being missing. Suddenly it's a big drama about Stefan being there. Whereas before, he'd been coming back for visits, and the way she spoke about it was like, yeah, whatever, dude. And then Jen's saying, oh, he stayed overnight, and she's like, I'm like, what the F? Why is everybody contradicting themselves here? Why is everybody, for the particular night that everything happened, or in Deb's case, a few nights after, treating normal events as suddenly huge red flags? Why this one time was it a what the F reaction to Stefan being there, when she's just said that he'd been back various times and she was just like, oh, whatever. And like I said, if she didn't know that Stefan was there, when she was told that Maddie was missing or Maddie was gone, why would she ask Jenn who who dropped her off at school? That would be a given. You wouldn't even ask that question. You would think that, well, Jenn dropped her off at school. Although my question would be, she's gone from where? Did she go missing from the townhouse? Did you take her to school this morning? Not who dropped her at school, but did you take her to school? Because that's what normally happens. Jenn normally takes her to school, nobody else. So to have this reaction of who dropped her off at school, and then when she's told that it was Stefan, say, what the F is Stefan doing here, not what the F is Stefan doing driving her to school. Especially given that we've had this impromptu discussion a bit over a week earlier, where she's actually pointed out that it's not normal for Stefan to take Maddie to school. It was something that was so concerning for her with regards to giving information to help Maddie get found, that even though the conversation was over, she had to say it. And she was struggling with it because, like I said, clearly there's that loyalty to Jenn. So it's that being torn between wanting to help out Maddie and not wanting to say something that's going to get your friend in trouble. So everything I'm seeing here, her difficulty with spitting out a single sentence, her difficulty just giving a simple answer, her evasiveness, I think she is finding herself between a rock and a hard place. I think that she did know more, and I think people are right when they say that they think she was protecting Jenn. I think she wanted to speak up for Maddie, but at the same time she didn't want to say something that was going to get Jenn in trouble.
But anyways, so like at some point, I guess because it was open, then that allowed him to be able to have somewhere to stay with, I guess, when he was trying to help Jenn with the dogs, something like that. But the point is, within the time that I stayed there, he lived upstairs for like 4 months, and then he dipped out. At any point, if they used that for him to stay at some point, if I didn't see him downstairs, I didn't know, because I was just in and out. But from what I remember, he stayed there for 4 months, and then he left.
So then she managed to really succinctly sum up what she just spent forever trying to say. Basically, he was upstairs in that room for about 4 months and then he moved out. And then supposedly he came back a few times for visits and he was there on the Sunday night, but she didn't know he was there on the Sunday night. But she just stumbled over her words. She went down a million different detours, down these dead-end roads, where she then had to carefully reverse back out and try a different direction. I do think that she knows a lot more than what she was telling the detectives. And I think while she was trying to protect Jenn, I think subconsciously her brain was trying to blurt out the truth. And I think that's what we're hearing here. It's that battle between wanting to do the right thing and tell them what she knows, but at the same time wanting to remain loyal and protect Jenn. I mean, at this point in time, she was already out of the townhouse. They'd all moved out. I think she'd gone back with things, but they'd all moved out. So she wasn't trying to protect her home. She was protecting her best friend's sister. But it really does sound like she was battling over what to tell detectives here. And I don't know if she's headed for the hills or they just haven't gotten around to deposing her yet, but she is not on that list of depositions that have already been heard. There's not, as far as I know, currently any more listed as coming up, but she is not on the list of depositions, which I find really interesting because I would have thought she would be someone important to depose. And I think in a situation where she actually has to sit down and tell the truth, that there could be some interesting bits of information that come out from her. Now, given the length of this interview and the fact that I've really only gotten through 15 minutes of this interview and the fact that we're really only an hour and a half into this video, I should push on and make a longer video and try and get through some more. But honestly, I need a bit of processing time. I need to get my head around what is going on here. And I think I need a bit of input from you guys as well. Your observations, what have I missed? Because there was so much to unpack here. There was so much going on in terms of non-verbal cues. And I know I'm not talking body language here, I'm talking what wasn't being said amongst all this word salad. So I am very interested to pause and hear your thoughts before I carry on with this. See if your thoughts align with what I've said so far. Because right now, my brain feels totally scrambled. She really struggled to give a straight answer here. And it certainly makes me think that she is definitely trying to protect Jenn. So I'm definitely going to pause here, come back to it in tomorrow's video. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and please leave a comment below. Let's figure this one out together. Thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.